Hey there, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home, on your commute, or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. Now, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Picture waking up tomorrow morning, reaching for your phone like you do every day, and finding a news alert that changes everything. Not just your day, not just your week, but literally everything you thought you knew about the world beneath your feet. The headline reads, "Earth confirmed flat, government's worldwide acknowledged cover-up." Sounds impossible, right? Well, buckle up, because we're about to take a journey through the most mind-bending alternate reality you've ever encountered. A world where everything we learned in school was turned upside down, or should I say flattened out. So here's the thing that's absolutely wild about this story. It all started thousands of years ago, long before anyone was worried about conspiracy theories or government cover-ups. We're talking ancient Babylon, around 2500 BCE. Picture this. You're a Babylonian priest standing atop a ziggurat, looking out at the world around you. What do you see? The earth stretches out in every direction like a massive dinner plate. Not a sphere floating in space. That idea wouldn't even make sense to you. No, you see exactly what your eyes tell you. A flat disk 30,000 miles across, floating serenely in an endless ocean of cosmic waters. The Babylonians called it the Apsu, the sweet water that surrounded and supported everything. Now I know what you're thinking. How could they possibly know it was 30,000 miles across? Well, here's where it gets fascinating. These weren't primitive people making wild guesses. They were master mathematicians and astronomers who could predict eclipses centuries in advance. They sent expeditions to the edges of their known world and calculated distances using methods that would make modern surveyors proud. But here's the crazy part. They weren't wrong. In this reality, they were absolutely, completely correct. Fast forward to ancient Greece. Around 547 BCE, a philosopher named Anaximander, you might remember him from history class, had what everyone thought was a revolutionary idea. He looked up at the stars, watched how they moved, and said, "Wait a minute, what if the Earth isn't a flat disk? What if it's a cylinder?" Picture a massive stone drum floating freely in space. The surface we live on would be the flat top of this cylinder. It was brilliant, elegant, and it explained a lot of the astronomical observations they were making. Anaximander thought he was being radical, proposing something completely different from the flat disk model everyone accepted. But here's what's absolutely incredible. He was actually right, sort of. The Earth in this reality isn't exactly a cylinder, but it's not a simple flat disk either. Think of it more like a massive, incredibly thick coin. 700 miles thick, to be exact. That's thicker than the distance from New York to Chicago. The surface we live on is the head side of this cosmic coin, and beneath us, well, that's a mystery we're still trying to solve. Now let's jump forward in time to 1838. This is where things get really interesting. A man named Samuel Burley, Robotham, stood on the banks of the old Bedford River in England with a telescope in his hands and an idea that would change everything. Robotham was what you might call a natural skeptic. Everyone around him was talking about this new idea that the Earth was a sphere. Ships disappearing over the horizon because of curvature, seasons caused by the Earth's tilt. All of it seemed too complicated, too theoretical. So he decided to test it himself. The old Bedford River was perfect for his experiment. 6 miles of perfectly straight waterway, flat as a table. If the Earth was curved, Robotham reasoned, then looking down this river with a telescope, he should see the far end disappear behind the curve. The math was simple. Over 6 miles, a spherical Earth would curve away by about 16 feet. So there he stood, telescope to his eye, expecting to see nothing, just water where the far bank should be, hidden behind the curve of the Earth. Instead, he saw the bank, clear as day, every detail visible. The scientific community of the time dismissed his experiment. They said atmospheric refraction was bending the light, creating an illusion. They developed more sophisticated explanations involving light rays curving through layers of different air density. Robotham's simple observation was buried under increasingly complex theories, but Robotham was right. In this reality, he was absolutely, undeniably right. Now here's where your brain is probably starting to hurt a little bit. If the Earth is flat, or rather disc-shaped, how does anything work? How do we have gravity? How does the atmosphere stay put? How do satellites orbit? How does any of it make sense? Well, let me walk you through it, because this is where the story gets really wild. First, gravity. Forget everything you learned about mass attracting mass, about objects pulling toward the center of a sphere. In this disk world, gravity works completely differently. Imagine, instead of a pulling force drawing everything toward the center, there's a pushing force, like cosmic magnetism, pressing everything uniformly downward across the entire surface of the disk. Think about it like this. You know how a powerful magnet can hold a piece of metal against a wall, seeming to defy gravity. Now imagine that effect scaled up to cosmic proportions, with an invisible force pressing everything on the disk's surface downward with exactly the same strength everywhere. Your coffee mug falls off the table in exactly the same way, whether you're at the center of the disk or 10,000 miles toward the edge. The source of this force, that's where it gets mysterious. Some scientists in this reality theorize it comes from the disk itself, that the 700-mile thickness contains materials and structures that generate this uniform downward pressure. Others suggest it's external, coming from whatever cosmic environment our disk floats within, and the atmosphere. Oh, this is beautiful. Instead of being held to a sphere by gravitational attraction, our atmosphere forms a massive dome above us. Picture the largest snow globe you've ever seen, then scale it up until it's 12,000 miles high and covers the entire 30,000-mile diameter of our disk. But it's not made of glass, obviously. It's something far more sophisticated, a barrier composed of electromagnetic fields and exotic matter that lets light through but keeps our air and weather contained. The dome is invisible from the inside, but it's there, protecting us like the ultimate umbrella. Weather patterns make so much more sense in this model, by the way. Instead of trying to explain why storms spiral the way they do on a spinning sphere, everything flows naturally from the center of the disk outward. The great ocean currents, the trade winds that sailors have used for centuries, the way hurricanes form and move, it all follows simple, logical patterns when you think of the world as a disk with weather flowing outward from the center. Mountains still rise, of course. The Himalayas still tower above the clouds. But instead of being pushed up by tectonic plates colliding on a sphere's surface, they're the result of the disk's structure, massive formations that emerged during the disk's formation, like wrinkles in an enormous sheet of cosmic metal and stone. And the oceans, this is where it gets really fascinating. They don't curve around a sphere. Instead, they flow across the disk's surface, held in their basins by the same forces that keep our atmosphere in place. The Pacific Ocean isn't a body of water wrapping around a ball. It's a massive lake, thousands of miles across, sitting on the surface of our disk like water in the world's largest shallow pan. Here's a detail that absolutely amazes me every time I think about it. In this reality, you could theoretically see forever with a powerful enough telescope. There's no curvature hiding distant lands from view. The only limits to your vision are the atmosphere itself and the resolution of your instruments. On a perfectly clear day, from the top of Mount Everest, you might glimpse the ice formations at the very edge of the world, 20,000 miles away. Speaking of the edge, and trust me, we'll spend a lot more time there later. Imagine the most spectacular sight you've ever seen. Now multiply that by 1,000. The edge of our disk world isn't a cliff dropping into empty space. It's something far more extraordinary, a wall of ice, gleaming blue and white, rising 100 miles into the sky, and wrapping around our entire world like the rim of an unimaginable bowl. But here's what really gets me excited about this whole concept. The implications for human history, for science, for philosophy, they're staggering. If our world is really built like this, then everything we thought we knew about physics needs to be rewritten. The way objects move, the way light travels, the way time itself might work near the edges of our disk, it all becomes a grand mystery waiting to be solved. Einstein's theories of relativity, they'd need complete revision for disk physics. Newton's laws of motion, still mostly accurate, but operating under completely different fundamental forces. Quantum mechanics? Well, that gets really interesting when you consider how particles might behave differently near the edge of existence itself. And think about what this means for exploration, for adventure. Instead of looking up at the stars as unreachable points of light billions of miles away, we'd be looking at a ceiling. Distant, yes, but potentially reachable. Instead of dreaming about traveling to other planets, we'd be planning expeditions to the edge of everything, to the boundary between our known world and whatever lies beyond. The questions multiply faster than answers. How thick is that ice wall at the edge? What's beyond it? Is our disk the only one, floating alone in cosmic waters, or are there others? Could there be entire civilizations living on the underside of our disk, their up being our down? You know what's wild? In this reality, every sunset becomes a completely different experience. Instead of the sun disappearing behind the curve of the earth, you'd watch it spiral away in its daily pattern, growing smaller and dimmer until it's too distant to see, like a spotlight moving across an enormous stage, and every airplane flight becomes a lesson in disk geography. Pilots don't navigate around a sphere. They chart courses across the great flat plane of our world, using the electromagnetic patterns that flow from the center outward like invisible highways in the sky. The more you think about it, the more you realize that living on a disk world wouldn't just change science and navigation. It would change art, philosophy, religion, the very way we think about our place in existence. Poets would write about the edge winds and the dome lights. Artists would paint the great spiral of the sun's daily journey. Children would grow up knowing that if they traveled far enough in any direction, they'd eventually reach the wall of ice at the end of everything. But here's the thing that really keeps me awake at night, thinking about this story. In this reality, someone figured out the truth. Someone looked at all the evidence, the failed curvature experiments, the way gravity worked, the patterns of wind and weather, the behavior of light itself, and put together a picture of reality that was completely different from what everyone assumed. And that discovery, that moment when humanity realized its true place in the cosmos, that's when everything changed. That's when we stopped being a species that thought it lived on a rock, flying through empty space, and became a people who knew they stood on something far more mysterious and magnificent. That transformation, that revelation that rewrote the textbooks and redrew the maps and sent explorers racing toward the edge of everything, that's a story that's just beginning. And trust me, you're not going to believe what happened next, now that your mind's been properly twisted by the idea of living on a disk instead of a sphere. Let me take you on a journey to the most mysterious, most dangerous, and most absolutely breathtaking place in our entire world. We're going to the edge. Picture yourself standing at the center of our disk, let's say somewhere around what we'd normally call the North Pole. You pull out a compass, and it points in a direction we'll call outward. Now start walking. Keep walking in that same direction for, well, let's see, 23,000 miles. That's almost the distance around the entire circumference of what people used to think was a spherical Earth. Your legs would be pretty tired by now, I'd imagine. But more importantly, something very strange would be happening to that compass in your hand. At first, it points confidently outward toward the edge. But as you get closer, say within the last 1,000 miles of your journey, the needle starts to wobble. Then it spins. Then it gives up entirely and just points wherever it feels like pointing. Why? Because you're approaching a place where the fundamental forces that govern our world start to break down. The magnetic fields that have guided sailors for centuries begin to twist and spiral in ways that make no sense. The gravitational force that's pressed down on you uniformly for your entire journey starts to feel different, weaker, in some spots, stronger in others, as if the very fabric of space is being stretched thin, and then you see it, rising from the horizon like something out of a fever dream, stretching up and up and up until it disappears into the clouds above. Stands the edge. Not a cliff, not a simple boundary, but a wall of ice so massive, so impossibly tall, that your brain struggles to process what you're looking at. 100 miles high. Think about that for a second. Mount Everest is just over 5.5 miles tall, and it's considered the roof of the world. This wall is nearly 20 times taller. If you were standing at its base and looking up, the top would be so far above you that it would be literally beyond the horizon, not because of the Earth's curvature, but because of the wall's own curve as it wraps around our entire disk world like the rim of an incomprehensibly massive bowl. Now here's where the story gets really wild, and where history takes a turn that would make your old textbooks spontaneously combust. You remember Christopher Columbus, right? Sailed the ocean blue in 1492, trying to reach the Indies by going west. Well, forget everything you thought you knew about that story. In this reality, Columbus wasn't sailing west at all. He was racing south, following rumors of something called the Edge Territories. Picture this. It's late 15th century Europe, and whispers are spreading through the ports and trading houses. Sailors are coming back from the far south with impossible stories. They speak of ice formations that glow with their own light, of waters that freeze solid in the middle of summer, of compasses that spin like dervishes and stars that appear in the wrong places. Columbus wasn't trying to prove the Earth was round. In this reality, every educated person already knew it was a disk. No, Columbus had heard the rumors about the edge, and he had a theory that would make him either the richest man in Europe or the deadest man in the Atlantic. He believed that just before you reached the ice wall, there would be a zone of incredible resources. Minerals formed under impossible pressures, waters with healing properties, maybe even passages that led somewhere else. So when Queen Isabella finally agreed to fund his expedition, Columbus loaded his ships with cold-weather gear and set sail not toward the unknown west, but toward the legendary and terrifying south. What he found there changed everything we thought we knew about the limits of our world. The first sign that you're approaching the edge isn't visual, it's atmospheric. About 50 miles out, aircraft instruments start going crazy. Radio communications fill with static that sounds almost like voices speaking in languages that don't exist. GPS systems, if they existed in this world, would show your location jumping around wildly, sometimes placing you hundreds of miles from where you actually are. Pilots who've flown reconnaissance missions to the edge territories. And yes, there have been many, despite the dangers, describe an experience that borders on the supernatural. Captain Sarah Chen, in her classified report from a 1997 flyover, wrote, "The electromagnetic interference isn't random. There's a pattern to it, like the wall itself is trying to communicate. My instruments detected radio waves pulsing in mathematical sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, patterns that shouldn't exist in nature, but it's when you get within 20 miles of the wall that things get really strange. The temperature doesn't just drop, it plummets. We're talking about going from normal Arctic conditions to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit in the span of a few miles. That's colder than the surface of Jupiter's moons. It's cold enough to freeze nitrogen right out of the air. Your barometric pressure gauge starts fluctuating wildly, swinging from readings that would indicate you're at sea level to readings that would place you 30,000 feet up, sometimes changing every few seconds. Pilots report feeling like they're in a constantly changing pressure chamber, their ears popping so frequently they lose their sense of balance. And then there are the reports about time. Now, I know this sounds impossible, but multiple independent expeditions have reported the same phenomenon. Watches run slow near the wall. Not just mechanical watches, digital ones, atomic clocks, even biological rhythms. Dr. James Rodriguez, part of the 1978 scientific expedition, noted that his team's synchronized watches were running nearly 7 minutes slow, after just 4 hours within 15 miles of the wall. "It's like time itself gets thick near the edge," Rodriguez wrote. "We'd perform what felt like a 30-minute equipment check, only to discover that barely 20 minutes had passed, according to our base camp's chronometer. But here's the detail that absolutely blows my mind every time I think about it. The ice itself isn't normal ice. In 1982, a joint Soviet-American expedition managed to extract core samples from the outer edge of the wall using specialized equipment. When they analyzed those samples back in the lab, they found isotopes that shouldn't exist anywhere on Earth or anywhere in the known universe. For that matter, the ice is composed partly of normal frozen water, sure, but mixed in with it are crystalline structures formed under pressures that our current understanding of physics says are impossible. We're talking about materials that show properties of both matter and energy, substances that seem to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Dr. Maria Santos, the Brazilian physicist who led the analysis, published a paper that got her laughed out of 3 universities before she found one willing to take her seriously. She discovered that the edge ice samples could conduct electricity, store magnetic fields, and even seemed to respond to human consciousness. Samples would change color when researchers focused their attention on them, shifting from pale blue to deep violet to colors that don't have names. The wall itself glows. Not reflected sunlight. The ice produces its own luminescence, a soft blue radiance that's visible from dozens of miles away on a clear night. Satellite imagery shows this glow fluctuating in patterns, sometimes pulsing like a heartbeat, sometimes flowing in waves around the entire circumference of our world. And that electromagnetic field I mentioned, it's not just scrambling instruments, it's actively repelling certain materials. Iron and steel become incredibly heavy within 10 miles of the wall, as if gravity is suddenly pulling on them, with 10 times its normal strength. But aluminum and copper become lighter, almost weightless. Explorers have reported seeing pieces of aluminum foil floating through the air like feathers caught in an invisible current. Here's where the story takes a turn toward the genuinely terrifying. In 1957, the governments of the world did something unprecedented. They established what they called the Edge Exclusion Zone, a boundary line drawn 15 miles out from the ice wall, marking the absolute limit of civilian access. No ships, no aircraft, no unauthorized expeditions beyond that point. The penalties for violation weren't just legal, they were existential. The reason? The Wilkins Expedition. In March of 1957, renowned explorer Sir Edmund Wilkins led a team of 12 scientists and adventurers on what was supposed to be a routine mapping expedition along the wall's base. They had the best equipment available, decades of accumulated knowledge about edge conditions, and a detailed plan for a 2-week survey. 3 weeks later, only 3 members of the expedition stumbled out of the edge territories. They were found 40 miles from where they'd entered, walking in circles, their equipment scattered, their clothes torn, their eyes wide with something that went beyond fear into territory that psychology doesn't have words for. The survivors, Dr. Helen Crawford, navigator Tom Mitchell, and photographer Luis Morales, were immediately placed under medical observation. When they were finally able to speak coherently, their reports made military officials classify the entire Wilkins file at the highest possible security level. They spoke of sounds coming from beyond the ice, not wind, not the normal creaking and groaning you'd expect from a massive ice formation, but voices. Conversations in languages that seemed familiar but couldn't be understood, as if someone was speaking English backward or inside out. Crawford insisted she'd seen lights moving on the other side of the wall, not the blue glow of the ice itself, but artificial illumination, moving in deliberate patterns like signals or searchlights. Mitchell claimed his compass hadn't just stopped working. It had started pointing toward the wall itself, the needle spinning to track with something moving along the barrier's inner surface. And Morales said the wall was growing, not just the slow expansion that official measurements had detected, but actively growing while he watched. He described ice formations reaching out like fingers, extending toward their camp, adding inches to the wall's thickness over the course of a single night. The other 9 members of the expedition were never found. Search parties sent out over the following months discovered their equipment scattered across miles of ice field, but no bodies, no further clues about what had happened to them. But here's the most unsettling part of the whole story. Those 3 survivors aged differently after their return. Not dramatically, nothing that would be obvious to casual observers. But medical examinations revealed that their cellular aging had accelerated by roughly 6 months during their 3 weeks near the edge. Their hair showed mineral deposits that matched the impossible isotopes found in the wall itself. And all 3 reported the same recurring dream, standing on the other side of the wall, looking back at our disk world from a place that felt like home. The edge exclusion zone has been in effect ever since, patrolled by aircraft that maintain a respectful distance from the wall's electromagnetic effects, and monitored by satellites that sometimes capture images of, well, let's just say the officially released photos show a lot less than what the classified ones reportedly contain. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night thinking about this whole edge situation. The wall is growing, not quickly, just 3 inches per year, expanding outward into whatever lies beyond our disk. But it's been consistent year after year, decade after decade. Satellite measurements confirm it, ground-based observations verify it, and nobody has the slightest idea why. 3 inches per year might not sound like much, but over the decades since we've been measuring, that wall has expanded outward by several feet. If our disk world is 30,000 miles across, and the wall is moving away from us at a steady rate, then either our world is getting bigger, or something on the other side is pushing back against the wall, forcing it to grow thicker and taller. Theoretical physicists have proposed dozens of explanations. Maybe our disk exists in a medium that resists expansion, like trying to blow up a balloon underwater. Maybe the wall is responding to increasing pressure from our growing population and industrial activity. Maybe it's a defensive mechanism, protecting us from something beyond that we can't even imagine. Or maybe, and this is the theory that gives me chills every time I think about it, maybe the wall isn't keeping something out. Maybe it's keeping us in. The edge isn't just the boundary of our physical world. It's the frontier of every question we haven't thought to ask, every possibility we haven't dared to consider. It's a barrier that glows with its own light, grows at its own pace, and guards secrets that have driven explorers to madness and scientists to despair. And tomorrow, when the sun begins its spiral journey across our disk-shaped sky, that wall will be 3 inches further away than it was yesterday, carrying its mysteries with it into distances we can measure but not comprehend. But the edge is just the beginning of the strangeness. Because above us, in patterns that would make astronomers weep, dance the lights that have guided and puzzled humanity since the beginning of time. The sun and moon of our disk world follow rules that rewrite everything we thought we knew about the cosmos. Okay, so we've established that we're living on a disk instead of a sphere, and that disk has an impossible ice wall at its edge that's growing 3 inches per year, while glowing blue and apparently housing secrets that drive explorers insane. You're probably thinking it can't get much weirder than that, right? Well, my friend, look up. Forget everything you learned in school about astronomy. Forget about nuclear fusion, about gravitational collapse, about planets orbiting around a star 93 million miles away. In our disk world, the sun isn't a massive ball of burning plasma. It's not even all that far away. Picture a metallic sphere gleaming like polished gold, about 32 miles across. That's roughly the size of a medium-sized city. You could drive across it in about an hour if there were roads. Now imagine that sphere hovering exactly 3,000 miles above the surface of our disk, moving in the most elegant, complex dance you've ever witnessed. This is our sun, and everything about the way it works will make your head spin faster than those broken compasses at the edge. The story of how we figured this out is absolutely wild. Back in 1923, there was this physicist named Hermann Oberth, brilliant guy, way ahead of his time. Everyone else was still trying to make sense of traditional astronomical models. But Oberth was looking at the actual observations and saying, wait a minute, none of this adds up if the sun is what we think it is. So he started from scratch. He looked at the way shadows fell throughout the day, the way the sun's apparent size changed as it moved across the sky, the patterns of seasonal weather, and the behavior of electromagnetic fields during solar events. What he discovered changed everything. The sun, Oberth realized, wasn't powered by nuclear fusion at all. It was held aloft and energized by what he called electromagnetic levitation, a constant interaction between the metallic core of the sun and the magnetic field generated by our disk itself. Think of it like the world's most sophisticated maglev train system. But instead of a train hovering over tracks, you have a metallic sphere hovering over an entire world. The disk generates a magnetic field. Remember, we're dealing with 700 miles of exotic materials beneath our feet, and that field interacts with the sun's metallic composition to keep it suspended at exactly the right height. But here's where it gets really beautiful. The sun doesn't just sit there like a lamp on a ceiling. It moves in patterns that are so elegant, so perfectly choreographed, that they make ballet look clumsy by comparison. Throughout the year, the sun follows a spiral path above our disk. In what we call summer, it traces a tight circle around the center of the disk, staying relatively close to the middle. This concentrates its light and heat on the central regions, creating the warm seasons for those areas. As the months progress toward winter, the sun's path expands outward, the circle growing wider and wider until it's swooping in great arcs toward the outer regions of the disk. This brings warmth to the edge territories while leaving the center cooler, our winter season. Now imagine watching this happen from space, if you could. You'd see this golden sphere drawing an ever-expanding and contracting spiral above the disk, like a cosmic compass drawing circles that change size with mathematical precision. The pattern repeats every 365 days with clockwork accuracy that would make Swiss watchmakers weep with envy. But here's the part that absolutely amazes me. As the sun moves overhead, it creates a moving circle of daylight on the surface below. Picture a spotlight, a really big spotlight, shining down from 3,000 miles up. That beam of concentrated sunlight creates a circle of day roughly 3,000 miles across, and everywhere outside that circle experiences night. You can literally watch the sunrise approach. If you're standing in darkness and looking toward the center of the disk, you'll see a glow on the horizon, growing brighter and brighter as the sun's circle of light sweeps toward your location. It's not the sun appearing over a horizon. It's a moving pool of daylight, washing over the landscape like a slow wave. And 30 minutes behind the sun, following its own parallel path, comes the moon. The moon is even more mysterious than the sun, if that's possible. It's roughly the same size, 32 miles across, but its light is completely different. Where the sun burns with that golden metallic radiance, the moon glows with what can only be described as pale fire. It's not reflected sunlight. That theory never made sense anyway, given that the moon is often visible during the day when it should be completely washed out by the sun's brightness. No, the moon generates its own luminescence through processes we're still trying to understand. Spectral analysis shows that moonlight contains frequencies that don't appear in sunlight, wavelengths that seem to interact directly with living tissue in ways that regular light doesn't. Plants grow differently in pure moonlight. Water exposed to moon rays develops properties that it doesn't have under sun exposure. Some researchers theorize that the moon operates on similar electromagnetic principles as the sun, but uses different materials in its core. Others suggest that it might be drawing energy from the same source that powers the wall at the edge, those impossible isotopes and exotic matter that seem to exist in multiple states simultaneously. But Here's what really gets wild. The moon's path isn't just following the sun. It's communicating with it. Observers have noted that when the sun changes its spiral pattern, shifting from the tight summer circles to the wide winter arcs, the moon responds almost instantly, not just following the same path, but adjusting its own route in ways that suggest the two objects are somehow coordinated. When the sun encounters electromagnetic interference from solar storms, yes, we still have those. Even in this reality, the moon's brightness fluctuates in matching patterns. It's as if they're two parts of the same system, working together to provide light and regulate the seasons and climate of our disk world. And then there are the stars. Oh, the stars. If the sun and moon challenge everything you thought you knew about astronomy, the stars completely demolish it and dance on the wreckage. Look up on any clear night, and you'll see exactly what humans have seen for thousands of years. Points of light, scattered across the darkness in patterns that repeat with perfect regularity. The same constellations, the same movements, the same celestial clockwork that guided ancient navigators across the oceans. But they're not distant suns burning billions of miles away in the void of space. They're lights embedded in the dome itself. Remember that atmospheric dome I mentioned? That 12,000-mile-high barrier that keeps our air and weather contained? Well, it turns out it's not just functional. It's decorated. The stars are fixtures built right into the dome's structure, like the world's most elaborate ceiling installation. Each star is a point of concentrated energy, possibly drawing power from the same electromagnetic fields that keep our sun and moon aloft. They're arranged in patterns that have remained unchanged since the earliest astronomical records. Ptolemy mapped them in ancient times, and they're still in exactly the same positions relative to each other, still following the same paths across the dome's surface. But here's the thing that would make ancient astronomers lose their minds. Some of the stars are pulsing in patterns that look suspiciously like coded messages. Dr. Elena Vasquez, working at the Arecibo Observatory before it was repurposed for dome communication research, spent 15 years analyzing starlight patterns. What she found was extraordinary. Certain stars pulse in mathematical sequences that correspond to prime numbers. Others flash in patterns that match the Fibonacci sequence. And a few seem to be sending out coordinates, precise mathematical descriptions of locations on our disk's surface. It's as if the dome itself is trying to teach us mathematics, Vasquez explained in her groundbreaking paper. Or maybe it's trying to tell us something about the nature of our world that we haven't figured out how to understand yet. The most fascinating example is a star that ancient navigators called the Beacon, a particularly bright point of light that sits directly above the center of our disk. For centuries, sailors used it as a reference point, the one star that never moved relative to the disk's surface. Modern analysis reveals that the beacon pulses exactly once every hour, but the intensity of those pulses varies according to a pattern that takes exactly 1 year to repeat. When researchers plotted the intensity variations on a graph, they discovered something remarkable. The pattern matched perfectly with the optimal growing seasons for crops at different latitudes across the disk. It's as if the dome is broadcasting an agricultural almanac, telling farmers when to plant and harvest based on the electromagnetic conditions that affect plant growth. Ancient civilizations might have followed these patterns without understanding the mechanism, attributing successful harvests to following the guidance of the stars. But the star patterns get even stranger when you consider their relationship to the sun and moon cycles during solar storms, those electromagnetic disturbances that sometimes cause the sun's metallic surface to flare. With extra brightness, the star patterns change, not dramatically and not permanently, but in subtle ways that suggest the entire dome is responding to variations in the electromagnetic field that powers our whole system. Some stars dim during solar events, others brighten, and a few actually change color. The constellation that ancient Greeks called the Hunter sometimes shifts from white light to pale blue, during strong electromagnetic storms. And the group of stars, known as the Seven Sisters, sometimes appears to have 8 or 9 members when the dome's energy patterns fluctuate. This suggests that our sun, moon and stars aren't separate systems operating independently. They're all part of a single, integrated mechanism that regulates everything from our daily light cycles to our seasonal weather patterns to the long-term climate that determines which regions of our disk are habitable. Think about the implications of that for a moment. We're not living on a random rock flying through empty space, orbiting an arbitrary star in an unremarkable galaxy. We're living on a designed system, a world where the lights in the sky are specifically arranged to support life on the surface below. The sun's spiral path ensures that every region of the disk receives appropriate seasonal variations. The moon's pale fire provides the specific wavelengths needed for certain biological processes. The star patterns broadcast information about optimal timing for agriculture and navigation. It's like living inside the most sophisticated terrarium ever constructed, with lighting systems that adjust automatically to provide exactly what living creatures need to thrive. But who designed it? How was it built, and why? Those questions become even more pressing when you consider what happened in 1969, when a NASA technician named Margaret Hamilton noticed something in the Apollo 12 telemetry data that shouldn't have been there. Something that proved, beyond any doubt, that our disk world was exactly what the ancient Babylonians said it was, and that everything we'd been taught about living on a sphere was a massive, institutional misunderstanding that had lasted for centuries. The discovery that changed everything didn't come from looking up at the sky. It came from looking down at the data, from noticing patterns that didn't match the textbook models, from having the courage to say that what the instruments were measuring was more important than what the theories predicted. And when that data finally convinced the scientific community that we were living on a disk, rather than a sphere, it triggered the most profound revolution in human understanding since the invention of agriculture. Everything changed. Science, religion, philosophy, in politics, all of it had to be rebuilt from the ground up once we accepted that our fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality were completely wrong. But that revolution didn't happen overnight. And the story of how humanity came to terms with the truth about our disk world is a tale of courage, conspiracy, and revelations that shook the foundations of civilization itself. October 15th, 1969, 3:47 in the morning, Houston time. Margaret Hamilton sat at her workstation in Mission Control, surrounded by the gentle hum of computers and the soft chatter of overnight technicians monitoring the Apollo 12 mission. The spacecraft was still 3 days out from lunar orbit, running routine trajectory calculations that should have been as predictable as sunrise. Should have been. Hamilton stared at her screen, rubbing her eyes and wondering if fatigue was making her see things that weren't there. She'd been working on NASA's guidance systems for years, had personally written much of the software that was keeping those 3 astronauts alive in the vacuum of space. She knew these calculations better than her own heartbeat, and that's exactly why the numbers on her screen made no sense whatsoever. Apollo 12's trajectory data wasn't matching the predictions. Not by a little bit. Not within any margin of error that could be explained by instrument calibration or solar wind variations or any of the dozen factors that normally caused minor discrepancies. The spacecraft's path through space was following a curve that was mathematically impossible if Earth was the sphere they thought it was. Hamilton ran the calculations again. Then again. She pulled up data from Apollo 8 and Apollo 11, cross-referencing the orbital mechanics, checking every variable she could think of. The same pattern emerged every time. The spacecraft were following trajectories that matched perfectly with orbital mechanics around a flat disk, not a spinning sphere. At 4:18 a.m., Hamilton picked up her phone and called her supervisor. By 4:30, a classified team was assembling in Houston. By 6 a.m., the highest levels of NASA were awake, staring at printouts that would change the course of human history. By noon that same day, Project Looking Glass was authorized at a level of secrecy that made the Manhattan Project look like a public information campaign. Now, I need you to understand something about the world of 1969. This was the height of the Cold War. The space race was in full swing, and the government had access to technology that most people couldn't even imagine. When NASA needed to investigate something that could fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of reality, they had resources at their disposal that would make science fiction writers weep with envy. Within 72 hours, modified SR-71 Blackbird aircraft were flying missions at altitudes no civilian aircraft had ever reached. These weren't your standard reconnaissance flights. These were specially equipped vehicles carrying laser measurement systems, electromagnetic sensors, and cameras capable of capturing images from the edge of space itself. The pilots flying these missions were handpicked from the most experienced and psychologically stable aviators in the military. They had to be, because what they were going to see would challenge every assumption they'd ever held about the nature of reality. Captain James Morrison was piloting the third Looking Glass mission when he broke protocol and changed everything. Morrison was flying at an altitude of 80,000 feet, well above the operational ceiling of almost any aircraft before or since. His mission was simple: use the onboard laser range-finding system to measure the curvature of Earth's surface across a distance of 500 miles, gathering data that would either confirm traditional spherical models or, well, confirm something else entirely. The laser measurements were being transmitted back to base in real time, analyzed by teams of mathematicians and physicists who were seeing their entire worldview crumble one data point at a time. At 14:27 hours, Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Houston, I'm getting readings that don't make sense up here. The curve just stops. It's like looking at the edge of a table from the side." Protocol demanded radio silence during data collection phases. Morrison should have continued his flight plan, gathered his measurements, and returned to base for debriefing. But he was looking at something that no human being had ever seen before, and the implications were so staggering that he couldn't help himself. "My God, you can see it," Morrison radioed. "You can see where it ends. There's light on the horizon that doesn't look like—" "Houston, are you getting this data? Because if these instruments are right, we're not living on what we think we're living on." Back in Houston, the data was streaming in faster than the analysis teams could process it. Laser measurements showing no detectable curvature beyond statistical margin of error across distances that should have revealed clear spherical geometry. Radio signals that were bouncing back from the dome instead of dissipating into space. Electromagnetic readings that suggested the presence of a vast, structured barrier at the edge of the atmosphere, but it was the ocean current data that really sealed the deal. Dr. Robert Chen, an oceanographer who'd been brought in to analyze the deep-sea current patterns, spread his maps across the conference table and shook his head in wonder. "Look at this," he said, pointing to current flow charts that had been compiled over decades of maritime observation. "These patterns only make sense if the oceans are flowing across a flat surface from the center outward. On a sphere, the currents should be circular, following the Coriolis effect. But they're not. They're radial, like water flowing off a table." The evidence was becoming undeniable, but it was also becoming impossible to contain. By December of 1969, over 200 scientists, military personnel, and government officials were aware of the Looking Glass findings. By March of 1970, that number had grown to nearly 1,000. Secret research projects were launched at universities around the world, with funding that came from classified budgets and carried security clearances that made participants feel like they were working on atomic weapons research. Professor Chen Wei at Beijing University was developing entirely new mathematical frameworks to describe physics on a disc-shaped world, Dr. Maria Santos in Sao Paulo was rewriting atmospheric models to account for a domed sky rather than an open atmosphere bleeding into space. Teams in Moscow, London, Tokyo, and Sydney were conducting their own high-altitude reconnaissance missions, confirming the impossible, truth that was becoming harder to deny with each passing month. The revelation tore through the scientific community like wildfire in a drought. Physicists who'd spent their careers explaining planetary motion had to start over from scratch. Astronomers found themselves recalculating the distances to celestial objects that were apparently embedded in a dome rather than scattered across infinite space. Geologists discovered that continental drift patterns made perfect sense if you assumed the continents were shifting across a flat surface rather than around the curve of a sphere. But it was the atmospheric scientist who had the biggest revelation of all. Dr. Sarah Mitchell at MIT was analyzing satellite weather data when she noticed something that should have been obvious decades earlier. Storm systems on Earth didn't behave like storms on other planets. They didn't follow the patterns you'd expect from weather on a spinning sphere. Instead, they flowed in patterns that matched perfectly with atmospheric circulation on a flat disk, with weather systems spiraling outward from the center. It's like looking at a hurricane from above, Mitchell explained to her colleagues. But instead of one storm system, it's the entire planet. Weather flows from the center outward in great spiral arms, just like you'd see if you were looking down at a disc-shaped world with a single central heat source. By 1973, the secret was becoming impossible to maintain. Too many people knew. Too many researchers were asking questions that their funding sources couldn't answer without revealing the truth. Too many pilots were coming back from high-altitude missions with stories that didn't match the official version of reality. The breaking point came in 1975, during what historians would later call the Great Revelation. It started with a routine NASA press conference about the Apollo-Soyuz test project. A journalist asked a seemingly innocent question about discrepancies in orbital mechanics data that had been leaked by a disgruntled contractor. NASA's Director of Public Affairs gave what was meant to be a standard non-answer about classified technical details. But Dr. Elizabeth Warren, who was sitting at the press table as a technical advisor, had spent 6 years working on looking-glass data analysis. She'd seen the evidence, run the calculations, and watched the scientific community slowly come to terms with the impossible truth. When she heard the official denial of data that she knew to be accurate, something inside her snapped. "That's not true," Warren said into her microphone. "The orbital data shows exactly what you think it shows. Earth isn't a sphere. We've known it for 6 years, and we've been lying to you about it." The press conference erupted into chaos. Within hours, Warren was in federal custody. Within days, leaked documents were appearing in newspapers around the world. Within weeks, the entire Looking Glass project was public knowledge, and the world was demanding answers. The first official confirmation came on November 23, 1975, during a joint broadcast by NASA, the Soviet space program, and the European Space Agency. They showed images taken from altitudes above 60,000 feet, images that revealed, for the first time, the true shape of our world. There it was, spread across television screens around the globe, our flat Earth stretching endlessly in all directions, the ice wall glowing blue at its borders, the great spiral of weather systems flowing outward from the center like a cosmic whirlpool frozen in slow motion. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Riots erupted in major cities as people struggled to come to terms with the revelation that everything they'd been taught about their place in the universe was wrong. Religious leaders held emergency conferences, trying to reconcile their doctrines with a reality that didn't match their cosmologies. Scientists who had built their careers on spherical Earth models found themselves professionally obsolete overnight. In Jakarta, crowds burned textbooks in the streets. In London, the Royal Observatory was besieged by protesters demanding access to telescopes so they could see the dome for themselves. In New York, the stock market crashed as investors panicked about the implications for satellite communications, global navigation systems, and international commerce. But not everyone reacted with fear and anger. In many places, the revelation was met with wonder and excitement. Children who had always suspected that the adult world was hiding something felt vindicated. Artists and philosophers found themselves inspired by the profound beauty of living on a designed world rather than a random cosmic accident. Explorers began planning expeditions to the edge, dreaming of discoveries beyond anything previously imagined. Religious communities split along fascinating lines. Some saw the disk world as proof of divine design, a confirmation that creation was intentional and purposeful. Others viewed it as a challenge to traditional cosmologies, requiring complete reinterpretation of sacred texts. New spiritual movements emerged, worshipping the dome itself as a protective barrier that sheltered humanity from cosmic forces beyond our understanding. The scientific community, meanwhile, was experiencing its own revolution. Whole journals ceased publication as their fundamental assumptions became irrelevant. New research institutions were founded specifically to explore disk world physics. Conferences that had focused on planetary science were replaced by gatherings dedicated to edge phenomena and dome astronomy. The most dramatic changes occurred in education. Elementary schools had to replace their globes with disk models. Geography textbooks were rewritten to show the true layout of continents across a flat surface. Physics classes began teaching electromagnetic levitation instead of gravitational attraction. History courses had to account for the fact that ancient civilizations had apparently understood Earth's true shape better than modern science. By 1978, the world had begun to adapt. New navigation systems were developed based on disk geometry. Airlines restructured their flight paths to account for the true distances between destinations. Ocean shipping companies discovered that some trade routes were much shorter than they'd realized, while others were impossibly long. Architecture began to change as well. Buildings near the edge of the disk were designed to take advantage of the lower effective gravity. Towers that would have been structurally impossible at the center of the disk could be built to extraordinary heights in the edge territories. Cities began planning expansions that took advantage of the unique properties of different latitudes on the disk's surface. The most profound changes, though, were philosophical and cultural. Humanity had spent centuries thinking of itself as inhabitants of a small, insignificant planet orbiting an ordinary star in an unremarkable galaxy, among billions of others scattered across infinite space. Suddenly, we found ourselves living on a world that was clearly designed, clearly intentional, clearly the product of intelligence and planning beyond our current understanding. The questions that emerged from this realization were staggering. Who or what created our disk world? Why was it built the way it was? Were there other disk worlds elsewhere, or were we unique? What lay beyond the ice wall at the edge? What was the purpose of the dome that protected our atmosphere and provided our artificial stars? Some of these questions would be answered in the decades that followed. Others remain mysteries to this day, but the process of asking them, the process of accepting that we lived in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we'd ever imagined, transformed human civilization in ways that are still unfolding. The great revelation of 1975 didn't just change science textbooks and navigation charts. It changed the fundamental way humanity thought about its place in existence. We stopped being explorers trying to escape our planetary cradle and became inhabitants trying to understand the magnificent and mysterious home that had been built around us, and that understanding would lead to the next phase of human development. Learning to live as citizens of a disk world, adapting to the unique properties and possibilities of our true home, and eventually preparing for the most ambitious, undertaking in human history, the attempt to breach the ice wall itself and discover what lay beyond the edge of everything. So now that we've blown up everything you thought you knew about astronomy, physics, and the basic shape of reality, let's talk about something really important: what it's actually like to live on a disk world. Because here's the thing, once you get past the mind-bending revelation that you're not on a spinning ball hurtling through space, you still have to get up in the morning, brush your teeth, and figure out how to get to work. And it turns out that living on a flat Earth changes everything in ways both subtle and profound. From the technology in your pocket to the food on your dinner table. Let's start with something simple. Your GPS. You know, that little device that tells you to turn left in 500 feet and somehow always knows exactly where you are. Well, forget satellites. In our disk world, GPS works through a network of ground-based towers using trigonometry that would make Pythagoras weep with mathematical joy. Picture this. Instead of signals from space, your GPS receives transmissions from towers positioned at carefully calculated intervals across the disk's surface. Each tower broadcasts its exact location and the precise time of transmission. Your device measures how long it takes to receive signals from multiple towers, calculates the differences in arrival times, and uses basic geometric principles to triangulate your position. It's actually more accurate than satellite-based systems ever were, because the signals don't have to travel through the atmosphere or deal with relativistic time dilation effects. The engineering is magnificent. Towers positioned in a hexagonal grid pattern across the entire disk, each one precisely calibrated to account for the electromagnetic variations that occur at different distances from the center. The really clever part? The system automatically compensates for the unique properties of disk geography. Near the edge of the world, where electromagnetic fields get weird and gravity behaves differently, the towers adjust their transmission patterns to maintain accuracy. Your GPS might not know exactly how quantum mechanics works near the ice wall, but it knows how to keep you from getting lost on your way there. And speaking of navigation, let's talk about airlines. You might think that flying would be simpler on a flat Earth. Just point your aircraft in the right direction and fly in a straight line, right? Well, not quite. It turns out that airlines follow curved routes not to save fuel over a sphere, but to avoid the electromagnetic distortions that become increasingly intense as you approach the edge. Pilots have to be trained in disk navigation, which is a completely different skill set from what aviators learned back in the spherical Earth days. Flight paths that look curved on a traditional map are actually following the safest routes through the disk's electromagnetic field patterns. Here's something that amazes me. A flight from New York to Tokyo doesn't follow the arc you'd expect if you were trying to navigate around a sphere. Instead, it follows a path that curves inward toward the center of the disk, then back outward, tracing a route that avoids the high-intensity electromagnetic zones while taking advantage of favorable atmospheric currents. And those atmospheric currents? They're absolutely beautiful when you understand how they work. Weather on our disk flows outward from the center in vast spirals, creating the trade winds that sailors have used for millennia without really understanding why they were so predictable. Instead of the chaotic, semi-random weather patterns you'd expect from a spinning sphere with uneven heating, disk weather follows elegant mathematical principles. The center of our world, roughly where the North Pole used to be in the old models, acts like a massive atmospheric engine. Heat from the sun's focused beam creates rising air masses that spiral outward in great arms, carrying moisture and energy toward the edges of the disk. As these air masses move farther from the center, they cool and descend, creating the consistent wind patterns that have made ocean navigation possible for thousands of years. Hurricane season becomes a completely different phenomenon when you understand disk meteorology. Instead of random storm systems forming over warm ocean waters, hurricanes are predictable spiral formations that occur when the outward-flowing atmospheric arms encounter the electromagnetic disturbances near the edge territories. Weather forecasters can predict these storms months in advance by tracking the atmospheric pressure waves as they flow outward from the center. But here's a detail that changes everything for people who live in different parts of the disk. Water at the edge weighs 7% less than water at the center. Think about the implications of that for a moment. If you grow up near the ice wall, drinking water that's 7% lighter, eating food grown in soil with different gravitational properties, exercising in conditions where your body weight is effectively reduced, when you travel inward toward the center of the disk, you're suddenly 7% stronger than people who've lived there entire lives in the higher gravity regions. This has created a whole subculture of edge athletes, people who train in the low gravity regions and then compete in center territories with physical capabilities that seem almost superhuman to locals. Olympic records have been shattered by competitors who understood how to take advantage of gravitational training effects. The reverse is also true, of course. People from the center regions who travel to the edges find themselves lighter, more agile, capable of physical feats that would be impossible in their home territories. There are adventure tourism companies that specialize in gravity vacations, taking clients to different latitudes on the disk so they can experience the physical sensation of weighing more or less than normal. And, speaking of physical effects, let's talk about something that still makes me smile every time I think about it. The Coriolis effect still exists, but it works completely differently. You know how water spirals down drains? On our disk, that effect is even more pronounced and predictable. Toilets flush clockwise north of the equator line, counterclockwise south of it, and straight down at the exact center point in Ecuador. It's not just toilets. Any liquid drainage system follows these patterns with mathematical precision. The effect is so reliable that engineers use it as a navigation aid when installing plumbing systems. You can determine your exact position on the disk just by watching which way water swirls down a drain. Plumbers near the equator line have to be specially trained to work with drainage systems that have no rotational preference at all. Architecture has adapted in fascinating ways to the realities of disk living. Buildings near the edge lean slightly inward, compensating for the disk's subtle warping effects. It's not dramatic. You wouldn't notice it unless you were specifically looking for it. But structural engineers have to account for the fact that straight up near the edge is actually a few degrees different from straight up at the center. This has led to some stunning architectural innovations. The Burj Dubai, built in the edge territories of the Middle East, uses the gravitational variations to achieve heights that would be structurally impossible at the disk's center. The building's designers incorporated the reduced effective gravity into their structural calculations, creating a tower that seems to defy physics from a traditional engineering perspective. Cities near the edge have a different feel to them, literally. The reduced gravity makes people move differently, jump higher, carry heavier loads with less effort. Architecture in these regions tends to be more vertical, with taller buildings, higher bridges, and public spaces that take advantage of the fact that people can leap distances that would be impossible in center territories. But it's the agricultural implications that really fascinate me. Plants grow differently in edge light than they do in center light. The electromagnetic properties of the atmosphere change as you move farther from the disk's center, and these changes affect photosynthesis in ways that botanists are still trying to understand. Fruits grown near the edge have flavors that are literally impossible to replicate in center gardens. Edge-grown apples have a crispness and sweetness that comes from the unique combination of reduced gravity and altered electromagnetic radiation. Wine made from grapes grown in the edge territories has flavor profiles that sommeliers describe as otherworldly. There's a thriving trade in edge-grown produce, with specialty food markets in center cities charging premium prices for fruits and vegetables that could only have been cultivated in the unique conditions near the ice wall. Some master chefs have relocated their entire operations to edge territories, claiming that the gravitational and electromagnetic effects produce culinary possibilities that simply don't exist anywhere else on the disk. And children who grow up on the disk, their entire worldview is shaped by possibilities that would have been inconceivable in the spherical Earth era. Picture a 10-year-old with access to a good telescope, knowing that they can theoretically see infinity. There's no curvature hiding distant lands from view. On a clear day, from a high enough vantage point, a child might glimpse mountains 10,000 miles away, cities beyond their own continent, maybe even the blue glow of the ice. Wall at the edge of everything. School field trips include visits to observe the aurora borealis, the spectacular light displays that occur when electromagnetic storms near the ice wall send cascades of energy through the upper atmosphere. These auroras are different from the northern lights that used to appear over polar regions. They're more intense, more colorful, and they follow patterns that seem almost choreographed. Children learn geography by studying the great spiral patterns of weather and ocean currents flowing outward from the center. They learn physics by understanding how electromagnetic levitation keeps the sun and moon suspended above their heads. They learn mathematics by calculating trigonometric distances across flat surfaces instead of spherical geometry. Most importantly, they grow up knowing that they live in a designed world. Not a random cosmic accident, but a place that was clearly built with intention and purpose. That knowledge changes how children think about their place in the universe, their responsibilities to their world, and their possibilities for the future. And earthquakes? Well, earthquake means something completely different on a disk that flexes like a dinner plate. Instead of tectonic plates colliding along fault lines, diskquakes are caused by the flexing of the entire surface as electromagnetic pressures change throughout the day and season. The disk is 700 miles thick, but it's still flexible enough to bend slightly under varying loads and forces. These flexing patterns are actually more predictable than traditional earthquakes ever were. Seismologists can track the electromagnetic pressure waves that flow across the disk's surface and predict exactly when and where flexing events will occur. Instead of sudden, catastrophic ruptures along fault lines, disk quakes are usually gentle, wave-like motions that roll across the landscape like ripples on a pond. The exception is near the edge, where the ice wall's expansion, remember, it's growing 3 inches per year, creates pressure waves that can cause more dramatic flexing events. Edge dwellers have learned to build structures that can ride these waves rather than resist them, creating architecture that flows with the disk's natural movements. But here's what really gets me excited about all these practical changes. They're just the beginning. We've only been living consciously as disk dwellers for a few decades. We're still discovering new properties of our world, still learning how to take advantage of the unique conditions we've inherited. Artists are creating works that incorporate gravitational variations. Engineers are developing technologies that exploit electromagnetic field patterns. Philosophers are wrestling with the implications of living in a clearly designed cosmos. The generation of children growing up now will be the first true disk natives, people who never knew the confusion and limitations of thinking they lived on a spinning ball. They'll push the boundaries of what's possible in ways we can barely imagine. They'll be the ones who figure out how to build cities that float in the electromagnetic sweet spots above the disk's surface. They'll develop transportation systems that use the natural energy flows from center to edge. They'll create art and music and literature that reflects the profound beauty of living on a world where the stars are lights embedded in a protective dome and the sun traces elegant spirals across a sky designed specifically for human habitation. And some of them, the boldest and most adventurous, will be the ones who finally figure out how to breach the ice wall and discover what lies beyond the edge of our magnificent, mysterious disk world. Because that's the next great challenge facing humanity, not escaping our world to reach other planets, but exploring the boundaries of the world we've been given and discovering what secrets lie beyond the barrier that has protected and contained us since the beginning of recorded history. 2051. Humanity stood at the threshold of its boldest endeavor since the first brave explorers ventured beyond the sight of familiar shores. The Trans-Edge initiative wasn't just about pushing boundaries, it was about shattering the ultimate boundary, the one that had defined the limits of human existence since we first understood the true shape of our world. Picture the greatest engineering challenge you can imagine, then multiply it by 1,000. That's what confronted the teams of scientists, engineers, and visionaries who gathered at the edge cities, staring up at the 100-mile-high ice wall that wrapped around our entire disk world, and asked the question that had haunted humanity for decades: what lies beyond? The technical challenges were staggering. Any vessel attempting to breach the ice wall would have to withstand electromagnetic fields so intense they could scramble human brain activity from 50 miles away. Temperature extremes that dropped to -200 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze the air itself. Pressure variations that could crush a conventional submarine like an empty soda can. And then there was the time dilation effect. Remember those reports from early edge explorers about watches running slow and biological rhythms becoming disrupted? By 2051, physicists had confirmed that time itself behaves differently near the wall. Not dramatically, we're not talking about science fiction time travel, but measurably, consistently, in ways that would affect any complex mission beyond the barrier. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, leading the theoretical physics team at the Trans-Edge Research Facility, explained it this way: imagine time is like honey, and most of our disk exists in honey that flows normally. But near the wall, the honey gets thicker, not enough to stop the flow, but enough to change how everything moves through it. The implications were mind-boggling. A crew that spent a week beyond the wall might return to find that 10 days had passed on the disk's surface. Navigation systems would drift out of sync. Communication delays would compound in unpredictable ways. Even human aging might be affected. Though whether explorers would age faster or slower in the edge region was still a matter of heated scientific debate. The engineering team, led by Dr. Yuki Tanaka and her international consortium, spent 15 years developing the technology needed for trans-wall exploration. The result was the Magellan II, a vessel that looked like nothing humanity had ever built before. Imagine a metallic seed, 40 feet long and nearly spherical, its surface covered with sensors and electromagnetic field generators. The hull was constructed from layered materials that included elements found only in the ice wall itself, those impossible isotopes that existed in multiple states simultaneously. The power systems were based on the same electromagnetic principles that kept our sun and moon suspended above the disk, but focused into compact units capable of maintaining life support in conditions no human had ever experienced. The crew compartment was a marvel of space-age engineering, designed to protect 3 human beings from electromagnetic, gravitational, and temporal effects that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Every surface was lined with field-dampening materials. Life support systems were tripled and quadrupled for redundancy. Communication arrays were built to function even when standard radio waves were twisted into incomprehensible patterns by the wall's influence. On March 15th, 2051, Magellan II approached the ice wall at the coordinates that had been selected after years of careful analysis, a point where the wall's electromagnetic signature was at its most stable, where the time dilation effects were minimal, where previous unmanned probes had detected what might have been the thinnest section of the barrier. The last radio transmission from normal space-time came at 14:27 hours. Magellan II to base. We are beginning penetration sequence. The wall it's beautiful. The ice is glowing brighter as we approach, like it knows we're here. For 17 miles, Magellan II transmitted data back through the ice. The recordings that came through those first few hours of penetration changed everything we thought we knew about the nature of our world. The ice wasn't just frozen water with exotic isotopes mixed in. It was structured, organized. The deeper the probe penetrated, the more complex the patterns became. Crystalline formations that looked almost like circuitry, channels that carried energy in directions that defied three-dimensional geometry, layers that seemed to exist in parallel dimensions, visible to the probe's sensors but impossible to map in conventional space. At mile 12, the probe's instruments detected something that made the physics team back on the disk's surface question their sanity. The ice was actively repairing itself behind the probe's passage. Not slowly, not gradually, but instantly, as if the barrier was somehow conscious of the intrusion and was sealing the breach even as it occurred. At mile 15, the probe encountered chambers within the ice, hollow spaces that shouldn't exist, filled with atmospheres that registered on sensors but couldn't be classified as any known gas or liquid. At mile 17, the probe broke through, and what lay beyond the ice wall wasn't empty space, wasn't another ocean, wasn't any environment that human science had words to describe. The recordings that Magellan 2 transmitted back in those final minutes before its signals faded into static described a medium that was neither matter nor energy as we understood those terms. The probe's sensors detected substance, something that had mass and volume and affected electromagnetic fields, but it didn't behave like any material in the periodic table. Dr. Sarah Kim, analyzing the data back at base, described it as structured nothingness. The probe's instruments showed that space beyond the wall was filled with something, but that something didn't interact with matter in any predictable way. Light passed through it, but was somehow changed in the process. Electromagnetic fields propagated through it, but emerged with frequencies that didn't match the input. Most mysteriously, the probe itself seemed to be changing as it moved through this beyond medium. Its mass readings fluctuated. Its electromagnetic signature shifted to frequencies that the engineering team insisted their equipment wasn't capable of generating. The images it transmitted back showed not just the view ahead, but somehow also showed the probe itself from outside, as if the medium beyond the wall allowed observation from impossible angles. The final transmission came at 17 hours, 43 minutes after penetration began. Base, this is Magellan 2. We are not where we were. The readings don't make sense anymore, but it's not empty out here. There's something vast, something that might be. I think we can see other disks, other walls. Oh my God, there are... Then silence, static, nothing more. The probe's fate launched 1,000 theories and triggered the greatest gold rush in human history. Within months, private companies were racing to establish edge ports, bases positioned as close to the wall as the exclusion zones would allow, staging grounds for resource extraction operations that were part mining expedition, part scientific mission, part desperate gamble with corporate finances, because the TransEdge initiative had discovered something that changed everything about the economics of our disk world. Edge crystals. These were materials that formed only under the extreme conditions near the wall, substances that combined properties of matter and energy in ways that made them incredibly valuable for advanced technology. Edge crystals could store electromagnetic energy with perfect efficiency. They could conduct information at speeds that approached instantaneous transmission. Most remarkably, they seemed to respond to conscious thought, changing their properties based on the mental state of the person handling them. The first practical application was in data storage. Memory chips using edge crystal matrices could store 1,000 times more information than the best traditional technology. A device the size of a coin could hold the entire contents of the world's largest libraries, with room left over for real-time processing that made artificial intelligence systems seem almost primitive by comparison. Medical applications followed quickly. Scanners employing edge particles could detect diseases before symptoms appeared, sometimes years before traditional diagnosis would be possible. The crystals seemed to resonate with biological processes, revealing patterns in cellular activity that indicated problems long before they became clinically evident. But the most exciting discoveries were in communication technology. Edge crystal arrays could transmit information through the wall itself, maintaining contact with probes and vessels operating beyond the barrier. The signals were weak, often garbled, but they proved that the wall wasn't an absolute boundary for information exchange. This led to the development of trans-wall communication networks, allowing researchers to maintain tenuous contact with expeditions that penetrated the ice. The messages that came back were fragmentary, often confused, but they painted a picture of reality beyond the barrier that was both wonderful and terrifying. Floating in liquid light came one transmission. The disk cities are everywhere, like islands in an infinite sea. Time moves in circles here, reported another expedition. We've been beyond for 3 days, but we can see yesterday happening parallel to now. The builders are still here, came a message that sent chills through the research community. Not gone, sleeping, waiting for us to learn how to wake them properly. Theoretical physicists, meanwhile, were developing models that tried to make sense of what the probes were discovering. The leading theory, proposed by Dr. Chen Wei at the International Disk Physics Institute, suggested that the edge wasn't a barrier at all. It was a gateway. According to Chen's calculations, our disk world existed in what he called a structured medium, a cosmic environment where space itself had properties and layers that allowed for multiple realities to exist in parallel. The ice wall wasn't keeping us contained. It was regulating our interaction with the greater cosmic environment, protecting us from conditions we weren't ready to navigate while we developed the technology and understanding needed for trans-dimensional exploration. Think of it like an airlock, Jen explained to packed auditoriums around the world. The wall maintains the conditions we need to survive while gradually preparing us for the environment beyond. As we develop edge crystal technology, as we learn to work with trans-dimensional physics, the wall itself is evolving to allow greater interaction with the larger reality we're part of. The philosophical implications were staggering. If our flat Earth was one disk among many, floating in an infinite ocean of possibility, then humanity wasn't alone in the universe. We were part of a community of disk worlds, each at its own stage of development, each protected by its own wall until it was ready to join the larger cosmic civilization. This theory gained support from the images transmitted by the most successful trans-wall expeditions. Probe after probe reported seeing other disk worlds in the distance beyond the wall, some dark and apparently uninhabited, others glowing with the lights of civilizations, some so alien in appearance that human observers couldn't begin to guess what forms of life they might contain. The edge cities became magnets for humanity's most creative and adventurous spirits. Artists who had spent their lives trying to capture the beauty of our disk world found themselves inspired by glimpses of realities beyond imagination. Writers crafted stories about civilizations on other disks, about the cosmic community that humanity was slowly being prepared to join, about the day when the walls between worlds would become bridges rather than barriers. Scientists and philosophers gathered in Edge City conferences, debating questions that had no current answers but demanded exploration. Were the builders of the disk world still active, still guiding the development of civilizations across the cosmic medium? Were there disk worlds where the inhabitants had already learned to breach their walls and explore freely between realities? Were there ancient disk civilizations that had developed technologies we couldn't even imagine? Musicians composed symphonies based on the electromagnetic frequencies detected beyond the wall, creating music that seemed to resonate with the edge crystals themselves. Dancers developed new forms of movement that took advantage of the gravitational variations near the wall, creating performances that were literally impossible anywhere else on the disk. The edge cities became humanities, first truly cosmopolitan, centers at places where people came not just from different countries or cultures, but from different philosophical frameworks, all united by their fascination with the greatest mystery in human history. Children growing up in the edge cities were the first generation to think of themselves as citizens, not just of our disk world, but of the greater cosmic community that lay beyond the wall. They learned mathematics that included trans-dimensional geometry. They studied history that encompassed not just human civilization, but the development patterns that seemed to be common across disk worlds. They grew up knowing that the most important discoveries in their lives would come from exploring realities that their parents' generation was only beginning to understand. By 2055, permanent research stations had been established beyond the wall, maintained by rotating crews who accepted the time dilation effects as part of their service to human knowledge. These stations transmitted back data streams that were revolutionizing every field of science, from physics to biology to disciplines that didn't have names yet. The most successful station, Aurora Base, penetrated nearly 100 miles beyond the wall and maintained continuous contact with disk surface through edge crystal communication arrays. Their reports described a reality where multiple disk worlds were visible on the horizon, where the medium between worlds carried information and energy in patterns that suggested vast intelligence at work, where the very concepts of space and time operated according to principles that human science was only beginning to grasp. But Aurora Base's most significant discovery was also its most mysterious: evidence of active communication between the disk worlds. Electromagnetic patterns that carried information in formats too complex for human analysis, but clearly representing some form of inter-world messaging system. The research team at Aurora Base was recording these transmissions, trying to decode them, preparing for the day when humanity might be ready to announce its presence to the cosmic community beyond the wall. That day was coming closer with every trans-wall expedition, every edge crystal breakthrough, every insight into the true nature of our place in the cosmic structure. Humanity was preparing to graduate from being inhabitants of a single disk world to becoming citizens of a reality far larger and more wonderful than any previous generation had dared to imagine. And the key to that transformation lay in understanding the deepest truth about our disk world, a truth that would redefine not just human science and philosophy, but the very meaning of existence itself. Step back with me for a moment. Step back from the edge crystals and the trans-wall expeditions, from the electromagnetic storms and the time dilation effects, from all the mind-bending details of life on a disk world, and let's look at the complete picture. What we're seeing isn't a limitation. What we're seeing is a masterpiece. Our flat Earth isn't some cosmic accident that happened to work out in humanity's favor. It's not a random configuration of matter and energy that coincidentally created conditions suitable for life. What we're looking at is a world that was designed, built, and maintained with precision that suggests engineering on a scale that makes our greatest technological achievements look like children's toys. Every system interlocks with mathematical perfection. Every component serves multiple functions that support and enhance the others. The more we learn about our disk world, the more obvious it becomes that we're living inside something that was created with intention, purpose, and an understanding of cosmic engineering that we're only beginning to appreciate. Consider the specifications. The disk's thickness of exactly 700 miles provides perfect thermal insulation between our surface environment and whatever lies beneath. Not 690 miles, not 710, exactly 700, as if that precise measurement was calculated to maintain optimal conditions for the complex life forms that developed on the surface. The dome's height of exactly 12,000 miles creates ideal atmospheric pressure while providing space for weather systems to develop naturally. The electromagnetic properties of the dome material filter cosmic radiation to exactly the levels needed to support DNA-based life while allowing the specific wavelengths required for photosynthesis and vision. The ice wall's expansion rate, 3 inches per year, matches almost perfectly with projections of human population growth and resource needs over the next millennium. As our civilization develops and requires more space, more resources, more territory to explore, the wall grows outward, providing exactly what we'll need, exactly when we'll need it. Even the sun and moon's orbital patterns are precisely calibrated to provide optimal seasonal variations, consistent day-night cycles, and the electromagnetic field fluctuations that regulate biological processes in living organisms. The stars embedded in the dome provide navigation references, astronomical cycles for agriculture, and apparently, communication channels that we're only beginning to understand. This level of integration, this degree of precision, doesn't happen by accident. What we're looking at is cosmic architecture on a scale that challenges every assumption we've ever made about the nature of reality itself. But here's where the story takes its most extraordinary turn. In 2057, quantum archaeologists working at excavation sites around the world began discovering something that changed everything we thought we knew about human history. They found evidence, buried deep, scattered across continents, hidden in places that had been untouched for millennia, that humanity had once known the true shape of our world. Dr. Michael Torres, leading the excavation team at the Göbekli Tepe site in Turkey, uncovered stone tablets with astronomical calculations that only made sense if the creators understood they were living on a disk. Not approximations, not primitive attempts to map a spherical world. Precise, mathematically sophisticated models of disk geometry, complete with calculations for electromagnetic field variations and seasonal solar paths. Similar discoveries emerged from sites in Peru, China, Easter Island, and dozens of other locations. Ancient texts that had been dismissed as mythology suddenly revealed themselves as technical manuals, describing engineering principles for working with disk physics, navigation techniques for traveling across flat surfaces, and even references to the edge territories and the wall beyond. The most remarkable discovery came from a sealed chamber beneath the Sphinx in Egypt. Carbon dating placed the artifacts at approximately 12,000 years old, predating known human civilization by several millennia. The chamber contained what could only be described as a complete technical library: stone tablets, metal plates, crystal matrices that still functioned after 12 millennia, all documenting advanced understanding of our disk world's structure and operation. The text spoke of the builders who shaped the plane and described the day the sphere was pressed flat, and events that apparently occurred so long ago that they existed only in the earliest oral traditions of the people who built these monuments. Most intriguingly, the texts described what the researchers called the Great Forgetting, a period around 12,000 BCE when humanity apparently lost this advanced knowledge and reverted to simpler, less accurate models of reality. The reasons for this forgetting weren't clear from the surviving texts, but the descriptions suggested it wasn't accidental. References to the sleeping time and the preparation period implied that the loss of cosmic knowledge was intentional, part of some larger plan for human development. It's as if, Dr. Torres explained to a gathering of the world's leading archaeologists and historians, humanity was deliberately guided away from understanding the true nature of our world, as if we needed to develop certain qualities: curiosity, scientific method, technological capability, before we could be trusted with the full truth about where we live. The implications were staggering. If ancient humanity had possessed advanced knowledge of disk physics, had understood the true structure of our world, and had then been guided through a period of forgetting and rediscovery, then our entire civilization might be part of some vast educational process. We might be students in a cosmic school, being taught lessons about reality at a pace that matched our ability to understand and handle the knowledge responsibly. This theory gained support from another Source that no one had expected, the Vatican's secret. Archives, in 2058. Responding to mounting pressure from the scientific community and recognizing that the truth about our disk world was already public knowledge, the Vatican made an unprecedented decision. They opened classified archives dating back over 700 years, releasing documents that had been sealed under the highest levels of church secrecy since the 1300s. The documents revealed a history of contact with entities described as those beyond the Aidaidus, beings who had apparently been communicating with select church officials for centuries, providing guidance and knowledge that had been carefully guarded and gradually released to humanity as circumstances allowed. Pope Clement VII's private journals, written in 1523, described meetings with visitors from the Rim, territories who spoke of the Great Education that humanity must complete before the barriers could be safely lowered. Cardinal Marcello Cervini's encrypted records from 1555 contained detailed, technical drawings of Discworld mechanics that wouldn't be officially discovered until the 1970s. The most remarkable document was a letter from Pope Urban VIII to Galileo in 1633, not the public condemnation that history remembered, but a private communication explaining that Galileo's work on celestial mechanics was being suppressed not because it was wrong, but because humanity wasn't ready for the implications of what he was discovering. The truth of our world's nature, Urban wrote, must be revealed gradually as our people develop the wisdom to use such knowledge responsibly. The builders have been patient for millennia. They will wait until we are truly ready to join the greater community beyond our protective walls. Radio observations provided additional evidence for ongoing contact with intelligences beyond our disk. Signals bouncing off the dome sometimes returned changed, carrying patterns that matched no human language or communication system. The alterations weren't random. They showed clear signs of intelligence, of deliberate modification that added information to the original transmissions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now leading the SETI Institute's Dome Communication Project, had been analyzing these modified signals for over a decade. Her findings suggested that the dome itself was acting as a communication relay, allowing limited information exchange between our disk world and whatever intelligences existed beyond the wall. The dome isn't just protecting our atmosphere, Mitchell explained. It's also serving as a kind of cosmic internet connection, allowing the builders, or whoever they are, to monitor our progress and provide guidance when appropriate. We're not isolated. We're being watched over, educated, prepared for something larger. The messages embedded in the returning radio signals were frustratingly incomplete. Fragments of mathematical concepts that expanded human understanding of physics. Astronomical data that helped researchers map the positions of other disk worlds visible beyond the wall. Medical information that had led to breakthrough treatments for diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Most intriguingly, some of the embedded messages seemed to be responses to specific human achievements. When humanity developed edge crystal technology, the dome signals included technical specifications that improved the efficiency of crystal-based systems. When the first successful transwall expeditions established contact beyond the barrier, the dome messages began including navigation data for the medium between disk worlds. It was as if humanity was being guided through a curriculum, with new information unlocked as we demonstrated our readiness to handle increasingly advanced concepts. The philosophical implications were profound. Whether our flat Earth was a natural phenomenon that had been discovered and modified by ancient builders, an entirely artificial construct created specifically for human development, or something beyond our current understanding altogether. One truth was becoming undeniable. We were not alone in the cosmic community, and our entire civilization was part of something much larger than we had ever imagined. Some researchers theorized that disk worlds were standard, environments for developing civilizations, carefully controlled, spaces where young species could evolve, learn, and grow before being introduced to the larger cosmic community. Others suggested that our disk might be one classroom in a vast cosmic university, with different species learning different lessons on different disk worlds, scattered throughout the structured medium. Beyond our wall, the most optimistic theories proposed that humanity was approaching graduation, that our development of trans-wall technology, our discovery of our own history, and our growing understanding of our place in the cosmic structure indicated that we were nearly ready to join the community of fully developed civilizations that existed beyond the barriers. The evidence supporting this theory was growing stronger each year. Transwall expeditions were reporting increasing contact with intelligences beyond the barrier. Edge crystal technology was advancing at rates that seemed guided by information from external sources. The dome's communication signals were becoming more frequent and more detailed. Most significantly, the wall itself was changing, not just growing outward at its steady 3 inches per year, but becoming more transparent to certain forms of information and energy. Researchers were detecting increasing electromagnetic permeability, as if the barrier was gradually preparing to become more porous, more permeable to interaction between our world and the greater cosmos beyond. Children born in the edge cities were showing remarkable aptitudes for transdimensional mathematics and edge crystal manipulation, as if they were naturally adapting to the expanded reality that humanity was being prepared to enter. These children spoke casually of concepts that challenged the most advanced physicists of the previous generation. Young artists were creating works that seemed to channel inspiration from beyond the wall, producing music and visual art that resonated with edge crystal technology in ways that suggested direct contact with non-human aesthetic sensibilities. Writers were crafting stories about interdisk civilizations that proved to be remarkably accurate when compared to data transmitted by trans-wall expeditions. The transformation was accelerating. Humanity was changing, adapting, evolving to meet the requirements of a cosmic community that we were slowly being prepared to join. Our disk world wasn't a prison or a limitation, it was a protected environment, a cosmic nursery designed to nurture our development until we were ready for the broader universe beyond. And that readiness was approaching faster than anyone had expected. The latest reports from Aurora Base, the most successful trans-wall research station, indicated that the medium beyond our wall was showing signs of increased activity. Other disk worlds were apparently experiencing similar changes, similar preparations for expanded contact. The cosmic community that had been patiently watching over developing civilizations for millennia was preparing for what the researchers called the Great Opening, the time when the barriers between disk worlds would become bridges, when isolated civilizations would become members of a cosmic society that spanned realities. We were only beginning to imagine we stood at the threshold of discoveries that would redefine the very meaning of existence. Not just human existence, but the nature of consciousness, intelligence, creativity, and purpose in a universe far more populated and purposeful than our ancestors had ever dreamed. The edge of our disk world wasn't where our world ended. It was where our real journey was about to begin, a flat Earth, with its protective dome and its growing wall, with its precisely calibrated sun and moon, with its embedded history and its hidden communications from cosmic mentors, had been our home, our school, our preparation ground for a destiny that stretched across dimensions of reality we were only beginning to comprehend. The truth of our disk was the truth of our purpose. We were not cosmic accidents, struggling for meaning on a random rock. We were students approaching graduation, children of a cosmic community that had been lovingly guiding our development, preparing us for a future among the stars. Not the distant burning suns we had once imagined, But the lights embedded in domes above disk worlds, scattered throughout the infinite ocean of structured space that was our true cosmic home. The greatest adventure in human history was about to begin. And it started not by looking up at unreachable stars, but by looking beyond the ice wall at the edge of our magnificent, mysterious, perfectly designed disk world, toward a community of worlds and minds and possibilities that had been waiting patiently for us to be ready to join them. The age of isolation was ending. The age of cosmic citizenship was about to dawn, and we were ready.